The wing part suspected of belonging to that missing Malaysian Airlines jet is now in a lab for analysis.
Officials are increasingly sure this is part of the fatal Malaysian Airlines plane that disappeared 16 months ago without a trace.
On a quiet night in March 2014, something extraordinary vanished from the sky. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 simply disappeared without a trace, carrying 239 souls into mystery. For over a decade, the world watched as authorities conducted one of aviation's most expansive search operations, spending more than $200 million to scan the ocean floor beneath miles of water. Yet despite all their efforts, all their technology, and all their resources, they found nothing. The investigation stalled. The families grieved. The mystery deepened. But one man refused to accept defeat. A retired British aerospace engineer named Richard Godfrey decided to ask a question that seemed almost impossible. What if we could track a vanished airplane using something as unlikely as amateur radio signals? What Godfrey discovered would challenge everything experts thought they knew about MH370. Using a forgotten technology that nobody had considered, he traced a path through the vastness of the Indian Ocean with precision that stunned the scientific community. His methodology wasn't based on theories or guesses. It was grounded in decades of established physics and supported by independent verification from leading research institutions. When his findings emerged, they sparked both excitement and skepticism. Some scientists called it groundbreaking. Others dismissed it as impossible. But the evidence spoke for itself, and it pointed to a location that had never been officially searched. The night MH370 disappeared began like countless other flights. The Boeing 777 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur with routine efficiency, climbing steadily toward cruising altitude. Communications with air traffic control seemed completely normal. But then, something changed. At 1:19 in the morning, the aircraft's transponder suddenly went dark. The system that made the plane visible to civilian radar simply ceased transmitting. To the outside world, the aircraft had vanished. However, military radar continued tracking an unidentified blip as it made an unusual sharp turn, deviating significantly from its planned flight path. The aircraft turned westward instead of continuing northeast toward Beijing, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula before heading out over the Andaman Sea. Military radar followed it for another hour before it disappeared completely from their screens as well. What made this disappearance particularly strange was that the aircraft continued making silent contact with a satellite system overhead. These weren't intentional signals meant for tracking purposes. Instead, they were automatic handshakes, brief connections made by the aircraft's satellite data unit. Scientists counted 7 of these pings in total, each one marking the aircraft's approximate location as it flew through the darkness. These ghostly signals became the only evidence of the plane's path after it vanished from radar. Using the timing and frequency data from these satellite handshakes, investigators drew enormous arcs across the Indian Ocean, trying to pinpoint where the aircraft might have gone. The northern route was quickly ruled out due to the heavy radar coverage in that region. That left the south, pointing toward the vast emptiness of the southern Indian Ocean. This led to what became known as the seventh arc, the final line drawn at 8:19 in the morning when the last satellite contact occurred. This curved path suggested that MH370 had run out of fuel somewhere along that lonely stretch of ocean. The search that followed became historically massive. Dozens of ships, aircraft, and sophisticated underwater drones spent years mapping more than 120,000 square kilometers of seabed, an area roughly equivalent in size to Pennsylvania. The operation cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet despite scanning vast stretches of ocean floor with advanced sonar technology, they found nothing. The search eventually suspended, having discovered only empty water and rocky terrain. This failure created a void that demanded answers. If the satellite calculations were correct, why did they lead nowhere? The wreckage that occasionally washed ashore along African coastlines offered only tantalizing hints, never enough to point definitively toward any specific location. Families remained without closure. Aviation experts admitted they were baffled. The public was left with an official narrative that increasingly seemed incomplete. Into this void stepped Richard Godfrey. Rather than accepting that the mystery was unsolvable, he began thinking differently. What if there was another way to track the aircraft that no one had considered? What if amateur radio enthusiasts scattered around the globe could inadvertently provide the clues that expensive satellite systems couldn't? This question led him to WHISPER, or Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, a technology developed in the early 2000s for radio hobbyists to understand how their signals traveled across the planet. WHISPER works through a simple but elegant system. Thousands of amateur radio enthusiasts worldwide constantly transmit weak signals, often less than 1 watt in power, barely stronger than a nightlight. These whisper-like transmissions bounce off the ionosphere, traveling thousands of miles across the globe. The signals create an invisible spider web of communication pathways connecting radio operators across different continents. Most of the time, these signals help hobbyists understand signal propagation and atmospheric conditions. But Godfrey realized something profound. If a massive aircraft like a Boeing 777 flew through one of these radio pathways, it would create a measurable disturbance. The disturbance wouldn't be dramatic. It might appear as a small dip in signal strength or a subtle shift in frequency, sometimes imperceptible to anyone not specifically looking for it. Yet Godfrey understood that these tiny anomalies were automatically logged in an online database called WSPRNet. This database contained years' worth of signal measurements, billions of entries from radio stations worldwide. If MH370 had indeed flown across the Indian Ocean that night, it must have crossed dozens of these invisible radio threads. If Godfrey could identify those disturbances and map them, he could potentially trace the aircraft's actual path. This realization launched Godfrey on a 3-year odyssey through data. He needed to sift through more than 200 billion lines of raw information from WSPRNet. This wasn't something he could do manually. He developed custom software designed to filter through the massive dataset, eliminating false signals caused by solar storms, atmospheric interference, and normal ionospheric chaos. Slowly, methodically, patterns began emerging from the noise. When Godfrey plotted the anomalies he identified, they didn't scatter randomly across the map. Instead, they formed a coherent track across the Indian Ocean. The path that emerged from his analysis was remarkable. It began right where Malaysian military radar had last detected the aircraft. From there, the disturbances curved southwestward, then turned south, creating the exact kind of course change that investigators had long suspected but never been able to pinpoint with precision. The trail of anomalies continued across the southern Indian Ocean until it terminated at a specific location, 29.12 degrees south, 99.93 degrees east. This point lay approximately 1,500 kilometers west of Perth, Australia, in deep water, but within a zone that no official search had ever thoroughly examined. For the first time since the aircraft vanished, someone had produced a new, data-driven location backed by quantifiable evidence. Not a vague estimate, not another theoretical possibility, but a specific point supported by mathematical analysis. This discovery forced the scientific community to reconsider what had been dismissed as unsolvable. Recognizing that his findings needed credibility from established institutions, Godfrey took his analysis to the University of Liverpool, home to experts who had previously helped locate the wreckage of Air France Flight 447 using similar analytical methods. These scientists understood both the promise and pitfalls of using unconventional data sources to solve aviation mysteries. When they examined Godfrey's findings, they subjected them to rigorous scrutiny. The researchers verified that every single one of Godfrey's identified anomalies aligned almost perfectly with the timestamps of MH370's known satellite contacts, synchronized within approximately 4 minutes. This wasn't coincidence. It was correlation that demanded explanation. When they searched for alternative explanations, they found none. No other aircraft operated in that airspace. No other explanation fit the data pattern. The Liverpool team then applied Bayesian statistical analysis, the same mathematical approach that had successfully located Air France 447. Their calculations indicated a 74% probability that MH370's wreckage lay within a small patch of ocean centered on Godfrey's coordinates. The skepticism that followed was inevitable and appropriate. Critics pointed out that Whisper was never designed for tracking aircraft. This was true, but Godfrey and his supporters noted that scientific history was filled with tools being repurposed for unintended applications. X-rays were discovered accidentally during experiments with cathode rays. Penicillin was found by chance when mold contaminated a bacterial culture. GPS was originally military technology now used for civilian navigation. The underlying physics of radio wave disturbance caused by large objects was solid and well-established science. Even Joe Taylor, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who invented Whisper, acknowledged that aircraft could indeed disturb these signals. To prove his methodology worked, Godfrey arranged a definitive test. His team chartered a Boeing 777 and flew it along the suspected MH370 corridor over the Indian Ocean. While the aircraft followed this route, Whisper stations worldwide monitored for signal disturbances. The results validated the entire theory. The disturbances appeared precisely where the aircraft was located, synchronized almost to the minute with its actual position. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was proof. Critics also noted that Godfrey's pinpointed location had shifted over time as his analysis refined, moving from 33 degrees south to 34 degrees south before settling at 29 degrees south. Rather than indicating guesswork, this evolution demonstrated good scientific practice. As more Whisper data became available and algorithms improved, the area of uncertainty naturally contracted. Significantly, Godfrey's coordinates had remained stable at 29 degrees south for over 14 consecutive months, suggesting the model had converged on a reliable answer. The wreckage question remained the ultimate test. No debris had been recovered from Godfrey's specified location. However, oceanographers at GMR, a German research institution, conducted extensive drift simulations of the debris that had washed ashore on African coastlines. When they reversed these drift patterns using ocean current models, the majority of simulated origin points traced back to an area within 100 kilometers of Godfrey's hotspot. This independent confirmation provided remarkable support for his findings. The implications of this work didn't go unnoticed by organizations with resources to mount another search. Ocean Infinity, the company that had led the massive 2018 search effort, signed a new contract with Malaysia's government to specifically search the area identified by Godfrey's analysis. The search zone was defined as a 15,000 square kilometer box centered on his coordinates. Most remarkably, the contract was structured on a no-find, no-fee basis, meaning Ocean Infinity would advance approximately $70 million in search costs, while only being paid if they actually discovered the wreckage. This financial commitment itself served as powerful validation of confidence in Godfrey's findings. The company deployed its flagship vessel, Armada 7806, equipped with Hugin autonomous underwater vehicles capable of diving to 6,000 meters. These robotic submarines could operate untethered for extended periods while scanning the seabed with sonar sophisticated enough to detect large debris fields under miles of water. With the weather window finally open after the cyclone season ended, the search could proceed methodically. A single vehicle could cover approximately 500 square kilometers daily, meaning the entire search box could be thoroughly examined in roughly 1 month. What started as a retired engineer asking an unconventional question had evolved into a legitimate scientific investigation supported by major institutions and backed by substantial investment. Godfrey's Whisper analysis had pierced through a decade of mystery, narrowing the search area from hundreds of thousands of square kilometers to a specific, manageable zone. The physics was sound. The methodology had been tested and verified. The location was supported by multiple independent lines of evidence, including debris drift analysis. After more than 10 years of searching in the wrong place, the world finally had a credible answer to where MH370 lay. The mystery that had captivated global attention, devastated families, and frustrated aviation experts for over a decade was finally approaching resolution. not through conventional means or expensive satellite technology, but through the creative application of established physics, using data generated by hobby radio enthusiasts. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from thinking differently, refusing to accept conventional limitations, and pursuing unconventional solutions with rigorous scientific discipline. Richard Godfrey's findings represented not just a potential location for a missing aircraft, but a triumph of human ingenuity and persistence in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.